Hi guys, I'm gonna go ahead and this is my testimony. I want to talk about this. I've talked a little bit with some people about just how I got to ministry in general and how God really took hold of my life. And it's one of those things where like I said, I've talked about it, but I've never talked this in depth about it. And so I just hope it encourages you guys, but also if you have any of this going on in your life, that's the whole point, is so you can see that one, you're not the only one going through uh, anything in life, but also that it might even help you see a perspective or even just you feel like you have an insight from this, and I hope it does get you something out of it. But also, uh, it's important to me, and testimonies are some of the strongest things we have as Christians uh, to relate to people and to tell people how did I get here and how did God work in my life. Uh, and so, I like to start out. So, as a kid, I was not confident in my salvation in Christ in God. Uh, I was like literally the way I viewed it was, well, it's up to God, uh, and I think I'm saved or I hope I'm saved. But really, at the time I didn't have the confidence in knowing what Christ had done for me and what God has done in my life, and knowing that me giving myself over to Him, that I am saved 100%, and having the confidence that I am saved. And so at the time, I really just did not have confidence in my faith. Nothing like I do nowadays. That's another way God has grown me over the years. But, so as a kid, though, I understood God was good. I understood Christ was good. I understood it was all good. I got baptized. I didn't know exactly. I At the time I look back, I'm like, I didn't really understand the full scale of it. We don't always ever do. Baptism is usually the beginning of our journeys, uh, along with Christ. But the thing was, is even as a kid, I didn't understand exactly 100% what it was, what it signified, but I understood that it was good. It was something very good, and that I needed to be baptized because it was good. And which I look back and I'm like, God was so much in me. I feel like that He protected me from so many things as a kid, and even just my mentality of helping me understand, even as a kid, that even though you don't understand, I did have a sense of faith because I understood it was good because God is good. Um, but as I was saying, that's really what it was. My mentality was being a good person. I knew I should be a good person, but I didn't know why. I didn't really know why. I just saw Christianity as being a good person and doing what is right, but I didn't really understand why we do it. Why? And it was like the best example I could give. It was like I was a rock. I knew good to be a good person. I was a rock, but me as a rock was on the sand. And because my foundation, I did not really understand as a kid. I just, I didn't, there were so many things I didn't know, and I didn't bother looking into things. I just thought, well, because I'm a good person, that should be good enough, which led to why I had a lack of confidence because I truly didn't understand what salvation really was. Uh, and to give you some context too, so my father was a youth minister and minister for 20 years. And I say this to give you more context to understand that I do not blame my parents for any of this. Like, my parents were great, raised me amazing. Uh, that just better tells you to help understand that I had every chance to learn about God. I had every chance to grow my faith. I didn't. And I look back and I know there were so many times, even my mom pushed it, my dad would push things, and I never took the initiative because I never saw the reason for it because I just didn't get it. And so, but I was like, well, I'm a good person though. I strive to be a good person and improve myself in those ways. And so there was things in Christianity I understood, but I really didn't when it comes down to what is actually important in your heart of and just understanding in general how salvation works. Um, and so it was, it's kind of embarrassing, but another great example is I didn't even know what grace meant until I was over 20. And like I said, it wasn't even like I was 20 years old. I was older than that. I honestly don't remember. It's not like I pinpoint track. But I legitimately did not even know what grace meant. And like I said, my dad was a youth minister and preacher for over 20 years. And I didn't know these things. Uh, and there's so much like I didn't know, especially until I literally just picked up the Bible and I decided I'm going to read it from Genesis to Revelation, and all the stuff I learned on the way. I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much more sense. And I was, yeah, which I recommend to everybody to do that. And it's just or just read your Bible in general because it is the truth. Um, but another thing too is on my testimony as a kid, how did I get from where I was as a kid, obviously, and where my faith was? This is to give you an idea where my faith was. But also, how the part of this testimony is going to be, how did I go from basically wanting to draw anime and make animation into going into ministry? And so, part of that too is as a kid as well, I always had a passion. I always had a want to write stories. I always loved using my imagination and coming up with these stories, creating worlds. Um, as an art, and but at the same time as I enjoyed it. I look back, a lot of it was honestly most likely, well, not most likely, a lot of it was actually escapism, which, if you understand how that is and if you've ever struggled with that, basically, it was easier to go throughout life using my imagination creating worlds than it was to actually deal with life as it was. Uh, and so, as a kid, though, I had these stories I wanted to write, and I had this passion, and so throughout the years, that changed on my outlets of how I wanted to do that. Especially at the beginning, I just had, as a kid, you don't think, oh, I want to be a writer, or oh, I want to do this, like with these ideas. And so, at first I went between, as a kid, I thought, oh, well, anything to do with like all these cool movies, these shows, comic books, like I was really into that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, like even at one point in time as a kid, I thought, oh, I could, run a comic book store even, or maybe, or something like that, or I could do this. And so part of me I eventually got to a point where I wanted to write. And so like, kind of like write a book. And so what I done is I, really got deep into that and writing. One thing though is writing takes a long time, and as a kid, especially when I'm younger, I had no patience, and so writing took forever. And I thought that's what I wanted, that's what I wanted, that's what I wanted, until I discovered anime. And so, when I was younger, in school, anywhere, what we knew was anime back in like the early 2000s, stuff like that. Like, so as a kid, if you were to talk about that in school, you were looked as the weird kid, because everyone looked at anime as like emo stuff, like all this sort of stuff, until I was in high school and I came across an anime and I realized, oh, there's so much more to this entire genre. And a lot of people even look at it as, there's a lot of adult content, and there's a lot of different things about it that cultural differences that people look at, especially older people in certain generations, and they're like, oh, it's bad stuff, you shouldn't, watch this. Which was something even at the time I was aware of. But when I had seen this anime, and I thought, oh, this is actually like a very wholesome anime, I thought, wow, there's a whole lot more to this entire genre. And so I really dug into that, and I always loved the art style. I always looked at it and went, man, that's so sharp, and stuff like that. Even as a kid, I thought, oh, that looks really cool. Especially Pokemon. As a kid, Pokemon was huge. I was really into that, and so like, that being an anime art style, I was like, oh yeah, and so I was totally into that. Um, and so then my whole everything. I was a senior in high school when I decided COVID hit, and I decided, what am I going to do with all this free time? I'm going to learn to draw anime. And so I decided to go into that. And even in college, when I went to community college, I got my general ed degree, and I went into graphics art specifically to learn computer graphics because I wanted to build my skills in that so I could go into drawing anime and drawing animations and actually like either working in anime studios or to even start my own animations. And so I was all deep in this. I mean, I was all deep into this. That was my plan, that was my goal. All right, so now to another part of my testimony I'm going to talk about, and this comes back to my dad being in ministry. So my dad, when I was about, oh, how old would I have been at that time? I would have been about around, I would guess, 12. Around that age, my dad was inspired to start a puppet ministry. And so for over 10 years, he was working on building this puppet ministry, and he called it Scoo's Arcs. You could probably look it up on YouTube or wherever, and you'd find it. I mean, trademarked and everything at one point in time. And so my dad had started this puppet ministry, and at first, I was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I like Jim Henson. If you know me actually personally, you'd learn really quick. I really like Jim Henson and puppets, and part of my dad starting puppet ministry is probably a lot behind that, but also we watched Muppets all the time when I was a kid. It was great. The thing was though is so over the years, puppet ministry, I thought, okay, yeah, so I guess, and he kind of always drug us into it. And I'm like, okay, okay, and as time went on, I started getting more involved. I helped Dad more, and I took actually my own personal time to help him. Part of building this ministry, and in my brain, especially around going back to my senior, I graduated high school, and in my brain, I thought, I'm going into college, community college and stuff, and I was like, okay, so Dad was like, all right, hey, been building this for 10 years. He was getting really excited. He was like, all right, because we're getting close. I think we're about ready to start like really taking this on the road, really start picking up this ministry, because he was just trying to build the ministry to get it up off the ground. And he was like, hey, us getting off the ground is so close. We're almost ready. And it was one of those things where I actually, by that point in my brain, my plan was to literally, I was going to use the ministry as a stepping stone. That ended up, when we really get deep down into it, that's really what I had turned it into in my brain. Is I had decided, okay, so I'm going to do the ministry for a couple of years, just ride that out until me drawing anime gets off the ground. That's literally how my brain processes. I look back and I'm like, man, it's almost embarrassing. But the thing is, I really thought I looked at ministry as a stepping stone of my goals. I was putting my goals ahead of Christ. I was putting my goals ahead of God because I was just looked at that ministry as a stepping stone. And so, but the thing is, it was always in the back of my mind, and I got excited. I started actually getting excited because I thought, it's actually kind of cool. And we had done a couple stuff for the puppet ministry, some videos and things like that, and even we had done a mock live performance for our church at the time, and that my dad was preaching at down in Arkansas. And it was one of those things where, I actually was getting excited deep down. And, I didn't realize how much until years later, uh, specifically because, all this is happening. I had this plan. This was my plan. And, together, we were all one family unit in my family. So all of us kids, literally, my sister's 5 years older than me, my older sister, and I'm the youngest. And so to keep in mind, I'm 22, and we all still lived at our house with our parents. Uh, And so we were all a very tight family unit, I would say. Now, years later, I realized how not tight we actually were, especially because, so the ministry, we had all this, and my dad's a preacher, and then my parents get in a divorce. Which, if you understand the implications of that, a preacher getting in a divorce is a very big no-no in the ministry. Churches do not take well to that. And so the thing was, is it literally completely uprooted everything in my life. All the plans I had, it completely shifted them. And so literally there was a part of me where it was, kind of still in shock for about a year or so, give or take. Uh, but the thing was, is it took me a long time to process exactly all my feelings, emotions on that. But one thing I realized is, I always thought ministry as a stepping stone. But one thing of ministry as a stepping stone, because I knew it was right, I knew it was good. Uh, I always thought that's me giving back to God. I did look at it like that, in a sense. And now, keep in mind, I'm judging myself very harshly. Some people, that know me are like, you weren't that bad. But, you can judge, you're the biggest critic of your own life at times. And so it was one thing where I realized that when ministry was taken out of my life as an option, as part of the plan, I realized how much I actually regretted that. And for a while, I didn't think too hard about it, but, later on I started realizing, oh, actually, I think I wanted to do ministry a lot more than I realized. And it's often, and we're all this way sometimes, we don't understand how much we wanted something. We don't understand how much we love something until it's gone. And even the world, not even just as Christians, even the world understands that concept. And because it's a natural human emotion, it's a natural way to process things of realizing, oh, when it's gone, how much it actually mattered to you. And so when ministry suddenly, ministry, I honestly my heart wasn't fully into it. Uh, when it was suddenly gone, I realized, oh, I actually want to do that more. Now, at that time, because going into the ministry, I was starting to dig a little bit more into the Bible. I was, because of knowing it was good, and the older I got to a point, when I got out of high school, I got to a point of realizing, becoming an adult, that my faith was based on me and not my parents' faith. And so at that time, I was starting to get more into the Bible. I started in Genesis, and I was probably at least to, I would say about Psalms, at least in the Bible. I was at least halfway at that time through the Bible reading. And so, it was one of those things where the more I was digging in, the more my faith was growing. And which added on top, God had it all planned. It's like, I look back, I'm like, God had it all planned. Wow. And everything, and I look at it and I regret nothing in my life because I look at now and where God has led me, and it's amazing. But the thing is when I realized, oh, and so then I was looking for other outlets, and even I was still thinking, okay, drawing anime, but that became more of a side thing because at the point of, all these plans, life structure kind of just falling apart, I had to figure out what to do, and I was still trying to figure things out. And I remember, so a friend of mine was like, oh, hey, we're, doing camp this year out at Rock Garden, Christian camp. And so he was like, you should totally come out and help. I was like, yeah, awesome. Yeah, sure. I'm totally going to do that. And part of that was because, like I said, in ministry in my mind, I thought, oh, hey, that's an outlet, kind of. Um, and so when I went, and I was literally all my past histories on. I can get further into that later, but I did not have the greatest experience because a lot of my know-how in ministries, especially my dad's ministries, I always knew the dark side of ministries. I always saw the glimpses of all the problems that were going on, all the differences and opinions within churches and like between elders and preachers and all that sort of stuff. Uh, And even like with camps, helping my dad run camps and stuff like that in the past, it always just seemed like it was a mess. And so being at Rock Garden, it was a very refreshing experience. I will tell you that. Uh, but the thing was, is I'm going throughout the week, and I'm thinking, I do actually like this. And then there was one evening, they do evening chapel, and there's the guest speaker for the week will give a sermon. And they said, hey, because I was sitting in the back, as an adult, I was sitting in the back, all the kids are in the front while they're singing right before the guest speaker comes out. And what they do at Rock Garden every single time before the guest speaker speaks for the evening is they go outside the back of the building and they gather around him and they pray about his message and it to reach the children. And I was one of the people. They said, hey, Elijah, come on with us. I was like, okay, yeah. And it was one of those moments where they were like, I was kind of like, okay, what's going on? And they're like, we're gonna pray for him. And it really hit me because at the same time as being in ministry, of behind the ministries, I saw all the bad sides to it, but because I wasn't actually like minister, because it wasn't ever my ministry, I never really saw some of the good sides of it. And so that I was just like, wow. And I thought, that is the coolest thing ever. And I felt God's presence. And that was the moment, so I had thought ministry, because I had always known I'm good at public speaking. I don't have fear of public speaking. I always knew I'm good at writing sermons, because in school, I was always good at writing essays. I was always good at building things. And so I always knew that. I knew that was something I could be good at, but I never thought of it as something like that. That was the moment, though, I decided, yes, this is what I want to actually do. And so it was one of those things where I look back and I'm like, man, like where God had taken me for all that time. But that was the moment I decided to go into ministry. And it was a couple weeks later when I decided to drawing anime. I still do it as a hobby, but I have turned it into a ministry. I literally, all my drawing anime, I decided a couple weeks later that I was going to draw anime for God. All my stories, I wanted to pretty much write stories that would glorify God but also minister. And so the craziest part is one of the main ones I'm working on, because people who know me, of course, I'm working on multiple. I can't stick to one. In my brain, I got all these different things going on. But my main one that I was really working on, really my passion project, when drawing anime and writing it, manga, literally when I decided to change it over and it was going to be for God, I realized that everything I had written in it, all the plans, when I decided to change it over to God, I realized all the different things that the more, I learned about God, the more I learned about salvation, everything, I realized that God was using me to write this, because when I started changing the script, of where I literally kept a lot of it still in there, but I realized that all this is amazing examples on how to minister and how to explain Christ and how to explain different things in Christianity, different ideas that often people, similar to me, how I was as a kid, don't understand. And because they don't understand Christianity when people are trying to minister to them, and they just think it's all weird or, okay, I don't know, and how to define things. And so it was one of those things when I looked at it and I realized God had been working for me on these ideas before I was even aware of it, because it flipped over so well. And as a writer and like an artist, from an artist perspective, oh man, I was like, oh, I was so like, oh man, and I got this fire. I was like, oh my goodness. And it's one of those things where, I'm doing this to help explain how I got to where I am, especially testimony for, if anybody wants to do it for my sermons, get a better idea on me, on stuff, but also this is also for my manga channel I want to do, and to keep people updated, but also just to talk about uh, just anime versus Christianity and how I use it actually to glorify God, despite what a lot of people see in the world. And I realized one thing I realized about it too. Uh, I started looking up and I was thinking, I couldn't find anybody. Uh, it's a very ripe field. Not that there's nobody, but it is a extremely ripe field right now. Of there's no main group ministering to that crowd, to people who watch anime, to this. There's nothing, like no big thing there of somebody who's trying to really focus in on that. And so that's what inspired me to do that. Now, I love preaching. That's honestly, I would be, it's preaching first, anime as a hobby / ministry second um, in my life. But the thing is when I realized that it was such a ripe harvest, it was a ripe field. It's, when Jesus talks about that, being a ripe harvest. Uh, and that's where another thing, when I realized that, I was like, God has prepared me for this. Now, there was a long time I had been struggling, debating on whether to start these videos, do this stuff, and I just always thought, it's a lot of work and a lot of dedication, and stuff like that, but also, am I ready? And I hit a point where I went, you know what, I just need to do it. I just need to do it. And that's where we are now. To lift up this testimony video, it's got pretty serious. You know me, I'm not the most serious person, but when we get to where it is serious, because our faith is serious. As joyous as it is, there are times where we are serious because it's important to us. And so, I am really excited to continue to do sermons. I hope you got a better insight into, well, let me hear, if there's anything in your life that, just hearing this, maybe you relate with. I go back to, in my life, I said, I was like a rock, but I put it on the sand. And it's one of those things where I felt like what was happening at a lot of point in my life, especially when I look back, I didn't see it in the moment what I was looking at, because I put it on the sand. It wasn't like the sand was being on the rock and was breaking and crumbling the rock. But the rock, because it was on the sand, started to drift. And going back to me being a good person, good person, but I was drifting still. Until I let Christ into my life. Really let him into my life. He was always in my life, but really decided to dig deep in and to understand and to learn more about him and to grow my faith and to let him in and change me into who he wants me to be. That's when I learned and I gained the foundation I have now. The solid rock foundation is to build. So now I have this solid rock foundation, and I can still be a good person. Because as a Christian, God is good. And if we imitate God, then we are good too. Now, do we do that perfectly? No. Don't get me wrong. But it's one of those things. So if that encourages you at all, I hope it does. And I'm glad you actually listened to the whole thing, if you did. But it's one of those things where there's so much you will not understand. There's so much you will not be able to see until you look back, and then you will see what God has done in your life. And, a lot of people, especially kids, they look and they're like, okay, yeah, sure. But I'm telling you, when you get older, you realize, and then when you truly give everything over to God, there's so much relief. You give all your anxieties over to God. Oh, wow, that's a lot of relief. When you truly are just like all in. God, I'm all in. And, there's some days we're not all in, But God knows what's in our hearts, that we want to be all in. And some days it's a little harder than others. But it is one of those things where when you decide to jump all in, you are able to look back and you see what God has really done, even when you didn't think He was there. At least there as you feel like you should have had Him be in your life. And so I just hope that, like I said, once again, I hope you got something out of this. Thank you for watching, listening. If I guess it's on YouTube, subscribe, yeah, but it's one of those things where I just hope not only this is encouragement, but it gives you also an insight, and I'm really excited. I'm actually excited to talk about things, to share stuff. Just in sermons, also in some of my side series, there's a lot I want to cover, and so I just I hope you guys are excited as I am, and that I'm not the easiest person, so you'll have to work with me. Oh man, but truly, I hope it was encouraging for you, uh, because a lot of people think perfect Christian. They look at a lot of people, and I think I could be one of those people that they think, man, I could never be like them. And the thing is a lot of times you'd be surprised is you've met that person when they've already grown. You didn't know them before they got to where they are, before Christ turned them into who He wanted them to be, and who He knew they were meant to be. And so sometimes that's an important thing about testimonies too, is because when you feel like people are further along in their relationship with Christ than you are, you feel like they're almost out of reach because you didn't know them before. You've only seen the after. And so I just want to continue and encourage you because we're all on a journey. I'm still on a journey. I still some days feel like I am hanging on to my seat. I'm like, oh, and God, it's like a roller coaster. God is in control, and sometimes I'm like, okay, God, wherever you lead the tracks. So, all right, but I want to go ahead and end the video, and I just hope you guys have an amazing day. God loves you, and I just hope that you just think about that. And I hope it encourages you, even if you are inspired to further your relationship with Christ. I hope this has done that for you. I hope that not necessarily I did anything, but I hope that God used me to speak to you. And so, all right. Well, bye.